of hands, please. Who was here last time? Good, because we're going to kick off this with the end of the story that Sue wouldn't allow me to finish last time, the fall of Rome. And then we're going to get into the meat of it, which is how on earth do they organise the medical arrangements at this ferociously horrible place called Cassino. So what we're going to talk about, the role of the Royal Army Medical Corps, which in the military world is what's called combat service support. You have the teeth arms at the front, the fighting echelon, then you have combat support, then you have behind them combat service support, of which the Royal Army Medical Corps is one, and a very important part, and a key part of the military, because the military is divided into, when it looks at its doctrine, into three component parts. The physical component, which is all the guns and bullets, the doctrinal component, which is all the thinking, but the most important one, the moral component. The individual, will the individual fight for you? And you have to give as much attention to the moral component as you do to the other two. Because if that soldier will not fight for you, you're going nowhere. And a key part of that is them knowing that the Royal Army Medical Corps will do what it takes to sort them out if they get in trouble. So it's a very important part of the military. There's the aim. I'm going to talk about how on earth they the Royal Army Medical Corps, organised themselves at Monte Cassino, and I'm going to zoom in on the 46th British Infantry Division, because it's one of the divisions that were there, and division's about 18,000 men. And I'm going to explain to you how what they did in the moral component was as important as the fighting itself. Because if the soldier doesn't have any faith in, if he gets hurt, he's going to get looked after, he will refuse to fight. It's as simple as that. And it's no accident that in 1944, in the rear areas in Italy, there were 22,000 deserters, just wandering about, helping themselves to whatever. And interesting enough, 98% of them were infanteers, the cold-blooded killers at the front, who just refused to fight. Why? Because we didn't get the moral component bit right. 22,000 of them. They lived by robbing trucks and then selling what they stole from the army to get money to then live with an Italian family, and they used that money to feed effectively the Italian family. And there's no accident. Of the 100% of kit that came into Naples, 40% of it never reached the front line. It was stolen along the way by these deserters. So, what are we going to look at? We're going to look at the fall of Rome. We'll finish the story that we started a couple of months ago. And then we're going to talk about what happens to that soldier. There he is in his sanger, in his little hole, and he gets injured. What happens to him or her? All the way back to sort of hopefully surviving the incident. So we'll look at that. And we'll focus on the 46th British Infantry Division, because if you understand how a division works, you'll see how the medical bit fits in. And it's a really, really important part of it because of this moral component. You have to persuade the individual that you will do what it takes to get them out of the jam they're in. Medicine is just one bit. You have to make sure the mail gets through. You absolutely have to make sure the mail gets through. Because if mail doesn't arrive, morale takes a dive. You have to make sure the boys and girls are fed and watered. Otherwise, they refuse to soldier. So it's a very important part. And then we'll look at how the 46th Division set up their medical evacuation system for a feature called Monte Cassino, a monstrous mountain in front of Cassino. You have to break through that to reach Cassino. And then we're going to look at the 4th British Infantry Division, a different division. Once we've arrived at Cassino, they're going to live on what's called the Faito feature, another enormous mountain range in the depth of winter. How on earth are we going to make sure that Johnny is, if he gets injured, extracted through this mountain range? It's a terrible, terrible set of circumstances that we're going to have to overcome. The Royal Army Medical Corps is going to have to overcome. And we'll talk about that. Then we'll summarise and give you a chance for questions. If you can save your questions till the end, it'd be great. Right, so the Battle of Monte Cassino started in January 1944 by attacking this beast of a hill just here. And the first battle was a disaster. We killed thousands of Americans. So we came back in February and we managed to kill an awful lot of New Zealanders and Indians. And we achieved the square root of nothing. So we came back in March and we did it again. And we monumentally got it wrong. So 3 battles over 3 months did nothing but fill the cemeteries. And in the middle of March, as the third battle is going on, General Alexander, who's commanding in Italy, decides, I think I've got this wrong. I think I really need to rethink this. And so he decides that he's going to pick up the 8th Army, which is on the other side of Italy, on the Adriatic, and he's going to bring them to Cassino. He's going to put 628,000 men on a 7-mile front. This is massive. Operation Diadem. And it was the brainchild, not of him, because although he was a very clever chap, the minutiae wasn't him. He was very much a big hand and a very political animal. The chap who actually wrote the plan was his chief of staff, General Sir John Harding, who went on to be the head of the army in the 1950s. Really clever guy. And he came up with Operation Diadem. And what Operation Diadem was going to do was going to pick up the 8th Army on the other side of Italy, and in that 8th Army you will find the 2nd Polish Corps. 2nd Polish Corps, Harold Macmillan, who went on to be our Prime Minister, described them as a crusade. They were there to kill Germans, not interested in anything else. And when they finished with the Germans, they want to get on to the ones they really hate, the Russians. It was a motivation that we have no concept of. They were there to kill Germans, to get back to Poland. So we give them the toughest task, the actual hill itself. And Anders, who commanded them, said, "Not a problem, we'll sort that out for you." In the valley, we're going to put the 13th British Corps. 3 divisions and 2 in reserve. In the hills, right down here, where we're going to look at in a second, because we've already got across the river, therefore we haven't got to do a river crossing, we're going to put the French Expeditionary Corps of 100,000 men. And then on the coast, at Mintorno, again, we've already achieved the river crossing way back in January, we're going to put the 2nd United States Corps. So this is enormous. And we're going to bring in 1,089 British guns and 590 American guns. If you think the British Army these days probably got about 50 guns, if it's lucky. 1,089 guns. It took 3 months just to bring the ammunition. And when they fired at 11 o'clock on the night of the 11th of May, it was described as like daylight. There was that much ammunition going off. So the first part of Operation Diadem is to break through the Gustav Line at Cassino. And if it falters, in reserve we've got the 1st Canadian Corps, the 6th British Armoured Division and the 6th South African Armoured Division. This thing is not going to fail. And the plan is then to drive the German 10th Army up this valley. It's called the Liri Valley. To a place called Valmontone. Just there. And the second part of Harding's plan is to break out of the beachhead at Anzio. Now, 6th Corps at Anzio would normally be 3 divisions, because a corps contains 3 divisions. So you can think 18,000 men, you can see how big a corps is. 6th Corps, by May, has 7 divisions in it. It is enormous. And it's going to be the battering ram. And its job is to get its sorry backside to Valmontone. And in getting to Valmontone, It's going to turn its guns to the south, and it's going to destroy the retreating German 10th Army coming this way. It's going to kill them all just there. Rome being in the top left-hand corner. If this works, it will be something where people will come for generations to worship at Valmontone, to see the execution of 50% of the German army in Italy, if it works. So it's going to rely on the British breaking through here and forcing the Germans back, and at the time to be decided by Alexander himself, the breakout from Anzio to block the German exit. And there will be a massive bloodbath at Valmontone. That was General Sir John Harding's plan, which, of course, Alexander supported. So look, we're going to look into this bit, because this is the controversial bit, because this battle is massively controversial. Because most of you never heard of Valmontone, have you? So it probably tells you it didn't go according to plan. So, this is the Anzio beachhead, and by the time it's been there in May 1944, it's been there for nearly 5 months. And it started off with 2 divisions, and it's now got 7 divisions in it. And it's divided into 2 parts. The British sector is on the left, in what's called the wadis, horrible, nasty re-entrance and riverbeds. Death was horrendous. And then the American sector, which is a bit flatter and nicer. And you can see Valmontone up in the top right-hand corner, and this here is the Velletri Gap, and Rome is way in the distance. So, our problem is that if we break through at Cassino, which we do on the 18th of May, we are going to have to still get past the Caesar line to get to Rome. And the plan is we will destroy them in front of the Caesar line. So by the time we've dealt with them, the Caesar line will just give way. And it's the last defensive line before Rome. So if the Caesar line goes, no more Rome. Not that Rome is militarily important, it's not. It's politically important, because if we can destroy Rome, we can deal with Mussolini at last. Our problem is that the Germans are expecting us to attack, and they've put their 3 divisions right in our way. Oh. And they're very good divisions. The 3rd Panzer Grenadiers is very good. The 4th Parachute Division is very good. 65th Infantry is not quite so good. They're all horse-drawn infantry, horse-drawn artillery, no mech. And their other 2 weaker divisions are in the American sector, because they're expecting us to come this way towards Rome. So that's the German defensive plan. And we're boxed in, and we've been boxed in 22nd of January. And this is now just approaching the end of April and the start of May. And on the 5th of May, Alexander gets on his boat in Naples and goes to Anzio and drives into the headquarters of General Lucien Truscott, who's the American commander, who's a very switched-on cookie. He says, "Lucien, lovely to see you. Everything all right?" He said, "Oh, sir, I'd love to see you. Wasn't really expecting you, but it's great for you to come. I'm glad you're here because my staff have been working on the options for the breakout at Anzio. So what I'd like to do, sir, is run through them with you, and if you decide on the right one, and I'll make some recommendations, then we'll run with it." He says, "Good idea, Lucien. Crack on, son." Right, sir. My staff have looked at Operation Crawdad. And what Operation Crawdad will involve is getting the British in the British sector to drive along the coast through the Pratica di Mare, which are salt marshes, and then beyond that is the River Tiber. And then we'll turn right and drive into Rome. And I've had a really good look at that, sir, and we've got a couple of problems. And he can say this, Lucien Truscott can say this to Alexander, because Lucien Truscott's mother is Irish, and Alexander is Irish, he's an Irish guardsman. So they have a bit of an affinity. He says, "Sir, if I'm honest, you boys in the British sector are on your knees. You're thin on the ground because you lost so many people, and you just run out of energy. So I'm not that keen on sending the boys up that coast, because I don't think you're going to get very far. And of course, you're in the wadis, And in the waddies, you can't use armour because it's all deep trenches. And if they do get past that, they'll get stuck in the salt marshes of Pratica di Mare. So looking at crawdads, sir, we think it's a bit of a pants idea. So we're not going to do that one. Alexander says, well, Lucian, good call. The next one we've looked at, sir, is Operation Grasshopper. Now, Operation Grasshopper is in the American sector. And what we're going to do, sir, is we're going to drive down the coast to meet up with the 2nd United States Corps coming the other way. We'll have a damn good party, lots of beer, lots of wine, but of course, that's no way near Rome. It's the wrong flipping direction. So we discounted that one as well, sir. He said, that's a very good idea, Lucy. You're clearly very bright. The next one we looked at, sir, is Operation Turtle. And what we're going to do for Operation Turtle is we're going to drive up the Anzio to Albano Road, which is the only tarmac road in the local area, as the British did way back in January. And as you well know, way back in January, the British got absolutely butchered for doing so. And we like the road, but of course the Germans are sitting on the road with 3 divisions. So the chances of us making that attack, sir, successful is pretty slim. In fact, one of my staff officers said, sir, if we went for this one in an American accent, it would be quite the stupidest plan. So I've discounted that one as well, sir. Lucian, you're sharp. Which leaves us, sir, with Operation Buffalo. Now, Operation Buffalo, sir, is to take 5 divisions in the American sector and drive them through the Velletri Gap, there's a mountain range here and a mountain range here, and land at Valmontone, which fixes up with General Harding's idea. I'm going to take 5 divisions, 240 tanks, and I'm going to drive like Billy-O for Valmontone. That is a flipping good idea, he says. Operation Buffalo it is, Lucian. Right, sir, thank you for that. I'll get my staff working on that right now. Because I know that you're going to launch the casino attack on the 11th of May, so I've got a week or so, and I'll be waiting for your call, sir, to launch this one. Because we'll do casino first, and as the 10th Army withdraw, I'll launch when you say. And Alexander gets on his boat at Anzio, goes all the way back to Naples, goes back to his room at the Caserta Palace in Caserta, and he has a nice cup of tea. And the next morning, General Mark Wayne Clark, who commands the 5th Army, who includes 6th Corps, turns up at Anzio. And Lucian Truscott says, lovely to see you, sir. We're a bit busy round here. You had Alex here yesterday, and now you've turned up. And Mark Clark says, yeah, I have turned up. What's going on? He says, well, while you were away, sir, I've agreed the plan with Alexander. We're going for Operation Buffalo. Are you indeed, he says. Well, I'm not happy with that, but crack on with it. But you are to be prepared for other operations. And Lucian Truscott in his memoir says, at the time, I thought nothing of that throwaway line. And Mark Clark gets in his boat, goes all the way back to Caserta, and he walks into Alexander's office and says, you, sir, are not a very good general. What do you mean not a very good general? Sir, you command 15th Army Group, which is made up of the 8th Army and the 5th Army. I'm in charge of the 5th Army. And in my army, I have 6 Corps. If you want Lucian Truscott to go for Operation Buffalo, you tell me first. You do not undermine my authority by going straight to one of my juniors. Alexander goes, Wayne, because he called him Wayne, you're absolutely right, mate. Sorry about that. Won't happen again. But Clark is perplexed by why a senior general like Alexander, who's hugely experienced, has done a military sin. You never, ever command more than one down. So if you're an army group commander, you give up your instructions to an army commander. You do not meddle in the affairs of a corps, let alone division or a brigade even further. So Clark's thinking, why is this senior officer dealing with one of my corps commanders? There must be an ulterior motive. And no one's been able to prove it, but we think, Clark thinks, if the boys get stuck at Valmontone, then the British will drive round them and be in Rome before me. So I'm not going to have it, he said. Up here, didn't say anything to Truscott. So on the plan, everyone thinks we're doing Buffalo. Mark Clark has said, be prepared for other operations. So the Battle of Cassino starts on the 11th of May. By the 18th of May, we've captured the monastery, and now we can unleash the breakout at Anzio. And that comes on the morning of the 23rd of May. And 70% of the Air Force that was supporting Cassino now switches to support Anzio. It was 30% for Anzio, 70% for Cassino. It's now been switched. So they're bringing in massive air power as well. This thing is going to be unbelievably successful. So on the 23rd of May at 0600, at the same time as they're doing an attack down at Cassino, Operation Chesterfield, Lucian Truscott unleashes Operation Buffalo. And on the morning of the 24th, they've lost 2,000 infantrymen and they've lost 140 of their tanks. But this thing is rolling. And it's absolutely bulldozing its way between the Alban Hills and the Lupini Mountains. And it's heading for Artena. And on the evening of the 24th of May, Colonel Howes, who's commanding the guys at the front, says, "Sir, I'm in a soft spot. For Pete's sake, let the whole of the 1st Armoured Division come this way. Send everybody to me," he says. He's at Artena. He's 4 kilometres from Valmontone, and there's not a single German in Valmontone. So when Truscott goes to bed that night, he thinks, job done. And in the morning, he gets up and he's just having his breakfast. And in walks Brigadier Bran. Now, Brigadier Bran is the G3, the operations brigadier, working in Mark Clark's headquarters. He writes Mark Clark's plans. And Truscott says, "Brigadier, lovely to see you. What flipping are you doing here?" He says, "I've come with a message, sir, from General Clark. You are to adopt Operation Buffalo now." He says, "What?" "Buffalo now, sir." He says, "What? Buffalo? My guy said that was the stupidest plan." "I'm not doing it." He said, "What do you say you're not doing it? I'm just a brigadier. I'm the messenger. I'm the choir boy. If you want to speak to the general, he's the only person who can change my direction. Get me the general." He said, "I can't, sir." "What do you mean you can't?" "Oh, yeah, he hasn't got a radio." "What?" And this is what Lucian Truscott writes in his memoirs. And this is an American writing about an American. This isn't a Brit who's pissed off with a Yank. This is an American writing about an American. He says, "I was dumbfounded." Because what Truscott's going to have to do is take Buffalo and turn it 90 degrees to the left, separate the 3rd United States Division from the 1st Armoured, give the 1st Armoured to the 45th Division, and then drive. And that is fiendishly complicated. You move supply lines, you've got to move all your medical, you've got to move all your fuel, everything's got to change. And that delays the attack on Valmontone by 24 hours, just this whole movement that's going to have to take place. Now, Clark is very clever, because he doesn't not do Buffalo, he carries on with Buffalo, because he sends the 3rd Division on their way, but they've got no tanks, all the tanks are turning left, and being attached to the 45th Division. And that matters because in the 24 hours that Howe is shouting, "Get your boys here," to now, when he's told to change, the Hermann Göring Panzer Division arrive from 100 miles north of Rome. They turn up and they now dominate with all their armour Valmontone, and the infantry division struggles to take on tanks. So that window is about to close. In the meantime, Truscott is having to turn to the left, separate the 1st Armoured from the 3rd Division, and give it to the 45th with all the cluster that comes with that. Now, one of the reasons why this operation is so successful is because we managed to strategically deceive the German commander, Albert Kesselring, because he's expecting us to come this way. And the way we persuade him is we mount 2 divisional operations mounted by the British on the morning that the Buffalo is taking place. And their job is to do what's called mount a Chinese attack. Find every round of ammunition you can find and you fire it across the border into the Germans. Give them the impression that this is the direction of the attack. I don't want to go anywhere, just fire everything you've got into the Germans and focus their attention on that angle. And it's not until the morning of the 25th, the same morning that Brand comes in and speaks to Truscott, that Kesselring goes, pooh, I've been duped. They're not coming that way, they're coming that way, which is why he orders the Hermann Göring Panzer Division to get their sorry backsides down to Valmontone. If Howes had got what he wanted, the Americans will be sitting in Valmontone when the Hermann Göring Panzer Division turned up. Wasted 24 hours is a disaster. Now, the 1st Armoured Division is now working with the 45th Division, and they brutalised themselves fighting against those German divisions for 4 days and achieved the square root out of nothing. But as a result of that, the 34th Division is thrown in, the 45th Division is taken out, and the 34th Division, and they carry on brutalising themselves up against the 3rd Panzer Grenadiers. And a new division to arrive in the beachhead is the 36th United States Infantry Division, the same guys who were slaughtered on the Rapido, commanded by Fred L. Walker. And Fred L. Walker is just getting his boys set up, and he gets a warning order. Be prepared to take over from the 34th Division attacking on Turtle. And he thinks, what the flip? You slaughtered my boys at Salerno, you slaughtered my boys at San Pietro Infini, you slaughtered my boys at Cassino, and now, having rebuilt my division, you're about to send me into the cauldron that is this area here, where the attack is going nowhere. And he's desperate for a way out. Absolutely desperate for a way out. How am I going to avoid this problem? His problem is that he doesn't want to get involved in here. And he's sitting in the Velletri Gap, and in front of him is an enormous mountain range called Monte Artemisio. It's part of the Alban Hills, and the Alban Hills are the last hills before Rome. So he's looking up, and he's seeing this. He's down on the valley floor. He's seeing this. He's down here in the Velletri Gap. Valmontone is over here. Americans have come this way. And beyond Artemisio is Rome. And he's looking at that and he's going, flipping out, that looks pretty high. And he comes up with a plan. Now, Monte Artemisio, that feature I just showed you, is that feature just here. I'll just show that again. This ridge line here, which is very, very high, is that one just there. And the photograph is taken from somewhere over here. And sitting in the Velletri Gap is the town of Velletri. And this line here represents the American front line, with Valmontone over here. And this line here represents a boundary between the Hermann Göring Panzer Division and 362 Division, between 1st Parachute Corps and 76th Panzer Corps. That's a boundary. And a boundary in the military world is very, very dangerous. Because who's responsible for the boundary? The parachute boys are looking this way, the 76 Panzers are looking that way. 362 are looking this way, Hermann Göring looking that way. Who's looking after the boundary? And the answer was, nobody was. But the Americans don't know this at the time. So Fred L. Walker is sitting in the Velletri Gap, he's got a brigade down here, and he's got 2 brigades up here, 141, 142. Ignore that one because it's down here. So he's got 2 brigades here, and he's got 1 down here. He's got an engineer regiment. He's got 3 battalions of engineers. Engineers, like them, they can do things for us. Now, there's a wonderful chap called Harold L. Bond, and he goes back to Cassino in 1966, and he writes a wonderful book called Return to Cassino, and he just follows his route. Because this story in the American official history is 4 lines. 4 lines. And I'm reading this book, Return to Cassino, and I come across the real story. You know, and the reason why it's 4 lines is we'll hear later. He writes, Brigadier Stark. Now, in the American system, they have a very different system to us. In the British Army, the general goes everywhere. He goes and visits the soldiers, he's up at the front, he's giving his plans. Not in the American Army. In the American Army, the general sits in the command post, and he has 2 little acolytes, 2 little altar boys that go and do the direction for him. He has Brigadier Operations and Brigadier Logistics. And these people have power. A bit like being a consultant. And they can hire and fire as they wish. And Brigadier Stark is the operations brigadier in the 36th Division. He has clout. And it just happens that Harold L. Bond is now his assistant. And he's in his jeep with him. And he writes this in his book. He says, Brigadier Stack was constantly looking for some way to break the German defences. And after some fruitless hours with the battalions in the centre of our line, that's for the 143rd Battalions, 3 of them, we drove over to the extreme right flank. We drove over to here somewhere. There the front line seemed to be along a road which came in from the east, and after twisting and turning over the hills, led into Velletri. So it came through Lariano, and there's Velletri. This is the twisting and turning road. So he's somewhere around here. The sides of the road were heavily wooded. We found some soldiers from the 1st Battalion, the 141st. There's the 141st one. In positions on the south side of the road. On questioning them, Stack found that there were no Germans on the other side of the road. There were no Germans in here. Our men had orders to go as far as the road and then hold while the troops on their left caught up with them. So they're waiting for this lot to come and join them, because they're going to concentrate here. Stack looked at his map and found the marks of an old wood road which climbed the steep hills behind Velletri. So he's found a road that's going up here somewhere. It must have been used for lumbering operations many years ago. The map showed that it joined the paved highway we were on, only a few hundred yards from where we were. We walked cautiously towards the junction. When we did locate it, we discovered that the old wood road had been heavily overgrown. But Stack knew that a tank bulldozer, it's got an entire regiment of engineers, probably got about 60 bulldozers, could open it up in a very short time. Here would be a way to encircle Velletri and cut off the Germans. So his idea was to send a brigade behind the Germans to get them between German and Rome. So if you cut them off, this lot will have to surrender. That was old Stack's plan. Here would be a way to encircle Velletri. To do so would be to crack the Caesar line. The division had a regiment in reserve and a battalion of armour attached. So we've got armour, infantry, engineers, artillery. We've got the elixir. If we acted quickly, we could infiltrate a whole regiment, so a brigade, with tanks behind Velletri. Cut them off, and they would have to surrender. It could be systematically destroyed, but to Stack, it seemed a chance worth taking. So Stack jumps in his jeep, and he drives all the way back to see Fred Walker, his divisional commander. He says, "Sir, I've got a plan." He says, "Stack, tell me." Right, so what I want to do is I want to take the 141st, and I want to drive them behind Velletri. And then we'll cut the Germans off, and they'll be forced to surrender. And that will help us weaken the Caesar line. And Fred Walker looks at it and goes, "I think we can do better than that, Stack, mate. What I want to do is I want to take your suggestion, which is the 141st, and do that operation. But the other 2 brigades, that one's still down here, but we'll move them up. I want them to drive up the hill and then take that hillside. And then Rome is ours." And Stack goes, "No wonder you're the general. Because I hadn't thought of that, sir." So Walker that evening drives over to see Truscott. He says, "Sir, I've got a plan." And Truscott goes, flippin' hell, Fred, that's a cracking plan. But I've given you a warning order to take over from the 34th Division on Operation Turtle. I better check with the General. So Truscott that evening rings up Clark, and Clark says, listen, I've told you, get on with Operation Turtle. Okay, sir. So Truscott then speaks to Fred Walker and says, Fred, the game's off. Abandon that. Your warning order still stands. You will be taking over from the 34th Division on Operation Turtle very shortly. And Fred Walker sort of, God, who are these idiots? And Truscott sleeps on it. In the morning, at his breakfast, he thinks, I think Fred's got a good idea. So he rings him up. Says, Fred, we haven't had this conversation, but if you do wish to do this idea of yours, you crack on, son. We haven't had this conversation, and if it fails, I'm going to have to sack you, and I'll probably get sacked as well. So that evening, Walker organises for the two brigades to drive up, and at 5:30 in the morning, they surprise a German artillery officer having his 5:30 in the morning bath. And he must have pooed his pants as two entire brigades of infantry and 70 tanks descended on him. As a result of it, the 142nd went this way to cut them off at the back, and the 143rd went north. Caesar line was now cut, and we're on our way. That was the morning of the 1st of June. By the 5th of June, we're in Rome. Fred Walker unlocks the problem. Now, he's an embarrassment to Mark Clark, because Mark Clark wanted to go this way. He's managed to do it this way. And for that, he's sacked straight after the Battle of Rome, because Mark Clark does not want anybody to know what happened. So, on the 5th of June, in St. Peter's Square, in comes Mark Clark, and he meets up with the legendary Father O'Flaherty, who's a complete lunatic. He has two loves, God and golf. He's a complete and utter lunatic. He runs what's called the Vatican Lifeline. He hides British prisoners of war who have escaped from the Germans in the German nunnery. So you can imagine German nuns looking after British prisoners of war. And he's hunted down by a chap called Kappler, who's an SS policeman, who wants to kill him, because he knows that this lifeline has been run by O'Flaherty. And by the way, O'Flaherty can't abide the British. So why he's looking after the British, no one knows. He's been given, after the war, he's given a CBE. He just tosses it in the Tiber. Fucking British tossers. Hates them with a passion. There's a fabulous film called The Black and the Scarlet, or The Scarlet and the Black. It's all about these two characters, about the SS guy and O'Flaherty, who's completely and utterly bonkers. But what a character. Anyway, he meets up with O'Flaherty, who happens to be there. Clark is lost, so he gives him a choir boy, sticks him on the front of the Jeep, and he takes him to Capitolino Hill. And Capitolino Hill is the political heart of the Roman Empire. It's where the Senate sat and where the power was run from. And what Clark is saying is, I'm now God. And well done him. Most historians reckon that his decision to turn from Operation Buffalo to Operation Turtle killed and maimed an additional 200,000 soldiers, because the German 10th Army escaped, and therefore carried on the war between June 1944 right through to May 1945. We could have wiped out 50% of the German army in Italy if Clark had stuck to that flipping plan. Because he was an American, Alexander couldn't do anything about it, but he does write after the war in his memoirs. He's clearly a good writer. He said, I had always assured General Clark in conversation that Rome would be entered by his army. And I can only assume that the immediate lure of Rome for its publicity value, his ego, persuaded him to switch the direction of his advance away from Buffalo to Turtle. He wanted to be the first. He was convinced the British were going to get there first, and he was having none of it. None of it. And it was even written in an order, if a Brit gets to Rome before an American, my Americans can shoot them. What? We're supposed to be allies. So Clark is a hugely controversial figure. So that's the fall of Rome. Now, the agony of getting there, which is why Clark the decision is such a crime is all woven in the story I'm going to tell you now, because the world of medicine had it really tough in the areas around Cassino. Really, really tough. You didn't wander into A&E and get treated after 9 hours and then sent on to a ward. This is grim stuff. So let's hear about it. Now, let's just run through the evacuation procedure, because once you've understood the procedure, you'll see how it all fits. And it starts with you. You're right at the front line. You are 80 yards from the German position, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning. And a 155mm shell lands right next to you and takes your arm off. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. You're now going to scream for about 8 hours, because no one's going to come and get you, because you're completely exposed to machine gun fire and artillery fire. The stretcher bearers will only turn up when it gets dark. And it ain't going to get dark in May till about 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. So you're going to scream for 12 hours. Which comes back to the moral component. So you scream for 12 hours, it starts to get dark, and then the stretcher bearers from the unit that you're in the 3rd Longships, they will come forward looking for casualties from the day, dodging German machine guns fired on what we call fixed lines. You set up your machine gun, and every now and then you pull the trigger. And you do it 15 minutes, then you do it 12 minutes, and it's just annoying. And the stretcher bearers are trying to find all the casualties with all this machine gun fire coming the other way. If they find you, then they'll take you back to the regimental aid post. And in the regimental aid post, they will deliver you to the regimental medical officer, who's a young captain, newly qualified in the world of medicine, don't know a lot. But he has a huge influence on what happens next. He decides whether you live or whether you die. Simple as that. And if he thinks you'll survive the next part of your journey, which is going to take you to the next stage, which is to the casualty clearing point, he will put you on the transport. Either another load of stretcher bearers, or if you're lucky, a jeep, and we'll cover a jeep in a second. If he thinks you will not survive that journey, he will give you some morphine, stick you outside, stick an M on your head, and hand you to the padre, who'll give you your last rites, because that's it, mate. That's how brutal it is. If he thinks you'll survive the journey, because the second thing he's got to make a decision on, and you're experts at this, will he survive the trauma of the operation we're going to have to give him when he gets there? All these things have got to be computed by the poor old regimental medical officer who's only just qualified. So moral component is really important. You've got to trust the doc. That's why body and soul work so closely together. Padre and doc are always inseparable. If you survive that, then you'll be sent back from your regimental aid post in your battalion back to the casualty collection point. And that's where regimental aid posts come into in the brigade. So there'll be 3 of these things, 3 regimental aid posts, because there are 3 battalions in the brigade, all come into a casualty collection point. And that's where they'll meet for the first time the Royal Army Medical Corps, other than the doctor up the front, on the front line. And they're taken there either by jeep, I'll show you some pictures in a second, by mule, or by stretcher bearer. But someone will carry you the 3 kilometres or 5 kilometres or whatever. And when you get there, you're going to be transferred into the world of the Royal Army Medical Corps. And you're going to be taken from here to the advanced dressing station. So they sift and sort here, and they decide, right, yes, you'll survive, we'll take you back to the advanced dressing station. And at the advanced dressing station, you're going to be divided into 3 groups. It's the old triage system. If you're in the first group and you're suffering from shock, you'll go off to the main dressing station or the field dressing station. If you need a blood transfusion, that's where you'll go. So shock and blood transfusions, you go to the field dressing station or the main dressing station. If you're in the second group, and you require an immediate operation, then you'll stay at the advanced dressing station because that's the first point of surgery. It's as far forward as the surgical teams will come. They will not go forward to the collection point, and they certainly won't go forward to the regimental aid post. So that's where they're first, and it's not because they're cowards, it's because you need space, you need lighting, you need all the gear that you guys work with. And you can only do that quite a long way back. So that triage, shock, send them off to a different location. We're dealing here with advanced surgery. And the third group are the people who are fit to travel, who are well enough that they don't need to be dealt with straight away. Send them back to the next stage. So the next stage is here, which is the advanced surgical centre. So we'll deal with our immediate operation people now at the advanced dressing station. If they're fit enough to travel and they'll survive the trauma of that, get them to the advanced surgery where there are more and more surgeons waiting to try and put you back together again. Here, they'll hopefully stabilise you. Hopefully. If you don't make it, there's another padre waiting outside to deal with you. Padres are all over the place. If you do survive that, then we'll take you back to the casualty clearing station, where you'll finally meet an ambulance. And the ambulance will then take you, or the ambulance train will take you back to the field general hospital, where you'll convalesce, and you might have to have some more operations, and if you survive that, you'll go back to one of the base general hospitals in a place like Naples. If you survive that, you'll end up in a convalescent home, or you'll be on a ship going back to England because you've got no arms. So you're no good to anybody, so you're sent back. It's a pretty grim system, but it works, and it's the model that's still used today with some tweaks. The important bit is here. That's that first point of surgery. That's what the soldiers want. They want to be treated as far forward as they can be. They don't want to wait till Naples by the time the gangrene set in. It's a very important part of it. So, now I talked about a regimental aid post. That's the battalions. That's the killing machine. I was an infantry officer. That's the killing bit. Their regimental aid post, in this case up on Snake's Head Ridge at Cassino, is just there. The German front line is about there, 140 yards away. So the doctor is living well within machine gun and shell range. It's a pretty grim, there's no wonder the medical corps lost so many captains, because the captain is a medical officer. So up on Snake's Head Ridge, you see how close the regimental aid post is. So every night, the stretcher bearers would go out, find their casualties, bring them back, doc would make his decision, and then back they would go to the casualty collecting section, station. There were no ambulances forward, so you went by mule, simple as that. So Johnny Gurkha here, look, in a basket, one on each side. The trouble with that is you have to do it in the dark, and mules have a tendency to run away. Or you can have a bit more luxury, the French version. One on each side again. And if you're very, very lucky, you'll get a Jeep. This is a Jeep, and we put two stretchers on the back. It's a bit more comfortable. Still pretty horrible, but it's more comfortable. And if you're truly lucky, but nowhere near the front line, you'll get yourself a nice Austin K2 ambulance. Why does this matter? Because this is Snake's Head Ridge, just here. This is the monastery, this is the flat land, and this is an enormous ridge that stretches. You can see the advanced dressing station just there. So you get shot just in front of 593 just here. There's the picture I showed you of the regimental aid post. You will have to be extracted by mule all the way back down here. Back to the advanced dressing station. And it's no accident, again, with the moral component in mind. It started off as a dirt track, that long, thick black line. By the time the fourth battle comes, that road can take armour, which means you can bring ambulances up. That's good for the soldiers, because they know that when they've been evacuated back to here, they'll get an ambulance all the way down. They build this road, in 10 days they build a road up a mountain, it's incredible. Somewhere it's 45 degrees, you look at it and think, how do they do that? Why? Because we've got to get the soldier's mind sorted out. He has to know, or she has to know, we will do everything we can to extract you if you get injured. Now, we talked about Snake's Head Ridge. This is Monte Cassino just here, 1,700 feet above the valley floor. And that's the German position on 593, the most important piece of ground. And this is Snake's Head Ridge. And the doctor's house is about there. So you've got to get extracted from there to a hospital somewhere in Naples. It's a grim, grim task. And every time you sit on Snake's Head Ridge, you are being shelled from Monte Cairo at 5,000 feet. Because they can see everything that you're doing on Snake's Head Ridge. By the stretcher bearers could not possibly go forward in daylight. They get shelled with a machine gun. So, how does it all work? Let's just run through how a division is built, and you'll see where the medical bit comes. And then we spend a lot of money on that bit. Even today, a lot of money is spent on field hospitals and field ambulances. So in a division, you always have 3 infantry brigades. Those are the bayonets. Those are the cold-blooded killers. And each of those brigades has a battalion. And a battalion is about 1,000 strong. So a brigade is about 3,000 bayonets. But you never ever fight just with bayonets, because you'll get run over. So you have to have lots and lots of artillery. And in the division, you always have 3 field regiments, each with 24 guns. So you've got about 70 guns doing nothing but supporting the 3 infantry brigades. It's a lot of guns. You'll also have an anti-tank regiment, because there'll be tanks around, and you'll have an anti-aircraft regiment. These are the ones that shoot things out of the sky. So in theory, that division is protected from the sky by the 40mm Bofors of the regiment. You've also got masses of engineers, because you need engineers to build things for you. Roads, bridges, mining, demining, water, all sorts. You also have a reconnaissance regiment that's out front looking for the enemy, and you have what's called a machine gun battalion. Heavy weapons, very heavy weapons, that can have much, much longer ranges than the individual weapon systems inside the battalions. So this is a small mortar, these are the extra large mortars. So it beefs up the division. And the way that it works is the divisional commander decides what the task is, and he decides who's going to give that lot to in here. And if you're not important, you get nothing. If you're very important, you get loads. And then, out here in combat service support, you've got the medical. And each brigade is allocated a field ambulance. 500 guys from the Royal Medical Corps, and their job is to work and look after these brigades. So 183 will go to 128th, 184th will go to the, it's all done on precedent, numbers follow each other. So every brigade will have 500 people from the Royal Medical Corps to support them. That's good for morale. And they run the collecting stations, they run the advanced dressing stations, they come with all the doctors. It's a very well organised bit of kit. Very confusing, you wander in as a captain, and everywhere you look there's a colonel. And you sort of, until you realise they're doctors, they don't know anything, they're just dressed up. So, now that you've understood that a brigade is supported by a field ambulance, and you've understood that there's guns supporting, there's engineers supporting you, and there are 3 brigades in the division, let's look at the medical setup for this feature just here, Monte Cassino. There's Cassino just there. This is in the months, November and December, before Cassino started. So it's what's called the break-in battle, that area there. And notice the shape of it. It's a monster. If you look at the graphics of that is a huge beef. There's one on that side, and this is the road to Rome. And you have to go past Cassino to get there. So you have to own both this mountain and that mountain even to get to Cassino. So we're going to have a fight there. This is the same feature. Look at these contours. It is brutal. I mean, absolutely brutal. That's the Camino feature. This ridge line just here, it's this feature just here. And you've got soldiers on top, and your job is to look after them. Oh. And Tommy up top knows when he gets shot, someone's going to have to get him from Grenadier Wood down to the village of Miele and away. Your lot. That's a close-up picture of Monte Cassino. The 6 grenadiers go up here, and they'll get trapped in Grenadier Wood in here, and they get very badly mauled, and there's a lot of medicine involved. It's another picture of Barras Hill. So, that battle took place and was captured eventually by the 56th Division, and was then occupied by the 46th Division because the battle has moved on. So we're going to look at how this particular division is looked after from the world of medicine. Because they're now in reserve, deployed in these hills. But they need exactly the same care as the guys at the front, because that's how it works. They're well within artillery range, they're not in ammunition range, they're well within artillery range, and of course they've got all sorts of other things like VD, which they caught in Naples, and they've got malaria, which they caught from somewhere else, and they've got all the problems that you would associate with any society. So therefore they need to be looked after, even though at the moment they're in reserve, and we'll see a frontline one in a second. So, just look at that picture. Note 128 Brigade is here, 138 and 139, note the feature of Camino. So we're going to overlay that now with how it all works. The legend we're going to follow starts at the regimental aid post and ends at the field dressing station or the main dressing station. And you can see, and we're going to look at 128 Brigade, you can see the 3 battalions, the 5th Hampshires, the 2nd Hampshires and the 1st 4th. And you can see their regimental aid posts, where the young captain doctor, newly qualified, green behind the ears, hasn't got all the experience yet, he's playing God. If you have a casualty, he's going to, in this case, take a stretcher bearer or a mule back to the advanced dressing station. They haven't bothered with a collecting station on this occasion, and that's the wonderful thing about the military, they can be fluid. You haven't got to follow a template. So if you get injured as a 2nd Hampshire, you're going to have to be stretcher bearing all the way back to the advanced dressing station here at Cucuruzzo. That's your first surgery. So if you get your leg blown off in the 2nd Hampshires, in front of the Garigliano, you've got a bit of a while on the back of a donkey or jeep or hand carry. If you're in the 1st, 4th Hampshires, you're quite lucky because you're closer to the advanced dressing station and there's a jeep post. So the chances are you'll be doing that journey by jeep. If you're in the 5th Hampshires, you've got a hell of a long way to go. And note the purple is hand carried. So you're going to be hand carried all that way, which is probably 4.5, 5 kilometres to the advanced dressing station. Grim. Now, when you reach the advanced dressing station and you're treated, because you've been told by the quack you're going to survive, you will then get extracted again through the mountainous terrain to Calabrito. Purple is hand carry again, so you've been treated and now we hand carry all back to Calabrito, and then you'll be on a jeep or a mule back to the field car ambulance. At last, something comfortable 4-wheel drive. And from there, you'll be extracted by field ambulance to the field dressing station just here. So your journey is pretty ropey over very, very difficult terrain. Very difficult terrain. We'll show it in a second, we're up here. We're just here. This is where we were before with the 46th Division. You can see Monte Cassino. This is where the 3 brigades were deployed. But as a result of capturing Camino in December 1943 and the success of reaching Cassino, we have to occupy this piece of ground here. It's forced on us. We don't want to be there, but it's forced on us. And the reason why we have to occupy this piece of ground here is that our guns are just here. And they're all firing that way. And if the Germans own this, they can see straight into our gun lines. So we need to clear that piece of mountain. Although we don't want it, it's of no relevance whatsoever, we have to occupy it to stop the Germans seeing into our gun lines. So in January 1944, we cross the river and occupy these horrible, horrible mountain hills. I mean, really stark, as you'll see. That is the feature that they're going to have to occupy. They're not attacking through there. All they're doing is picketing the ground, because if the Germans own that, they can see into the gun lines over here. If they can see in your gun lines, they can shell all your guns, and you've got no more guns. If you haven't got guns, you're in the poo. So we have to go and occupy that piece of ground because the Germans own it. And we then picket it, and if we picket it, we attract all the problems that come with trying to survive in the mountains in the middle of winter. The doctors come quite out the list of requirements. You can see the feature. This is the feature. This is the feature that we look at. Another, as you can tell by the contours, monstrous place to have to live and be treated by you guys. So we've come from that side. Note the little village of Cocoruzzo, and note this road here, because I'm going to show you a photograph taken that way. We're going to come down there. And that is a picture just outside Cocoruzzo, looking at where we're going to have to go and live from January through to May. It's horrible. There's another picture. Where's it going? So, in March, because the 46th Division go first, and they suffer horribly, they're withdrawn, the 4th British Division is told, get your backsides into the Massif and stay there. And so this is, in this case, is 28th Brigade from the 4th Division. They're going to put the 2nd and 4th Hampshires in the north, Somerset's in the middle, and then the Kings in the south. You can see where the regimental H post is, look after the Hampshires, and they've been very brave. They brought the advanced dressing station right up and tucked it in behind the 2nd, 4th Hampshires, at what's called Cheshire Dump. Now this road here, on there, doesn't look like much. I was doing a TV programme called My Grandparents' War for a chap from Game of Thrones called Kit Harington, if you've ever come across him. And his grandfather won a military cross up on Titulo. It took us 40 minutes to drive from there to there. That was in a 4x4. So what that must take by mule or by stretcher bearer, I dread to think. And it's like that. And it's really, really tough country. So if you are injured, somewhere in one of the rifle companies, back to the regimental A post, doc decides you're going to survive, you'll be then stretcher beared, so on a stretcher, all the way back here to Hove, to Harrogate. You might have another treatment along the way if you're lucky. And then more stretcher bearers all the way down to an ambulance jeep. So you're going to be manhandled all the way on. And if that road is blocked, they might bring you this way, it's even longer. It's pretty grim stuff. This is not your walk into A&E and see a doctor. If you survive all that, these are the 3 battalions that I showed you, and you can get across the 2 major bridges, which are constantly shelled, by the way, because the Germans know they're there, then you can see the extraction routes to get you to where you want to go, which is either a field ambulance down here, or most importantly, a casualty clearing station. Horrible, horrible way to operate. which is why the military spends so much money on the medical side, because the moral component bit matters. It's so important for keeping that soldier motivated. So, I've talked about the fall of Rome. Hopefully you now think that Clark needs to be taken by the back and filled in. He does. It's wonderful. I take Americans to Italy and they've never heard of Mark Clark. And it's gratifying to know that, because they've all heard of Omar Bradley, they've all heard of Eisenhower, they've all heard of Patton. They've never heard of Mark Clark, and he wants to be remembered as the first general to capture Rome from the south in the 15th century. Yeah, but they've never heard of him. And by the time I finish with them, they hate him too. I talked about what happens to a soldier. In Afghanistan, which is what, 5, 6, 7 years away, you had what was called a Pedro. A Pedro, you were pulled out within 15 minutes. That Chinook helicopter was guaranteed to be there within 15 minutes, with a full surgical team on board. That's the moral component sorted out. Here, if you get shot at 8 o'clock in the morning, you ain't got no flipping Pedro coming. You've got a 9 or 10 or 11 hour wait. Brutal. So we talked about the action on wounding. I talked about the 46th Division and how we spend a huge amount of our money on the combat service support side. Medicine matters. Not because we want to put the soldiers back in the front line. We want them to stay there in the first place. What's going on in there matters. Talked about the medical setup of Camino and then Faito. Any questions? That all makes sense. Have you concluded that it's a horrible place to fight a war? So,
thank you. We will have a couple of questions and then time for supper. So, yes.
I mean, I just thought of this. In the Falklands War, they discovered that the soldiers who were left out overnight in freezing cold had a better recovery than the ones who were picked up immediately. And I was told that from this they learned, from this they lowered the temperature in the field.
oh, to replicate.
Because, in other words, their bodies closed down, so they weren't in shock.
Yeah.
They discovered.
So the incubation.
Yes, they discovered if they were left out
Yeah.
overnight in the freezing cold and picked up the next day,
I didn't know that.
that they had, once they got them into surgery,
Yeah.
they had a higher rate of recovery than the soldiers who had been picked up with
Straight away and removed.
an hour or less and
Wow.
carried straight on.
Yeah.
And it's because that they then lowered the temperatures
You need to
in there. Did that
put on
have
for
anything
Zoom
to
if you
do-
want. Can you just make a comment so that they hear the?
Oh, yeah, sorry, the question.
So is there any data that says that the ones who were left out in the mountains in the cold
Not that I've seen.
survived better than the
Not that I've
ones-
seen. But you've got to be careful what you compare.
Yeah.
We sent.
We just give the Zoom people a question.
Yeah. So the question was in the Falklands War, those people who were left out overnight on the freezing hillside had a better survivability chance than those who were extracted straight away and then treated. And something to do with maybe there was an incubation period which stabilised their functions. Now, you've got to be careful what you compare here, because we sent the Falklands, the Marines and the Parachute Regiment, who are, I'm an infantier, but these are the creme de la creme, and their fitness levels are much higher than line infantry like me. So you've got to be careful what you compare here, because one of the things that allowed them to do what they did in the Falklands was their incredible level of fitness. And it's no accident that in the second part of the Falklands, when they bring in 5 Brigade, which is 2 foot guard regiments, and the Gurkhas, they had to be moved by ship because they couldn't walk, because they weren't fit enough. So it's difficult to compare apples and pears.
But those very fit men also did not survive.
I think a lot of it's up here.
This is actually a medical question,
Yeah,
not
it is.
actually medical, and
Yeah.
certainly with trauma.
I'm a thick Inverness.
Yeah.
I don't do. No.
So
Yes, I get to a doctor who's
there
standing
is,
in a surgery.
there's evidence in trauma in ITU and places they're using cooling, and of course in premature babies we cool an accident. We'll cool babies as well. So there's that's a very different subject. But yes, there's a lot. Yes.
I'm impressed you think I was a doctor.
Question at the back.
One extra point and one question. The point being, an old family friend was Rex Loring, who was the main surgeon for burns in the RANC in Italy. And I asked him once what was the main cause of serious burns. And he said it was people smoking in petrol dumps.
I'm be surprised.
And so the back areas could be dangerous.
Yeah.
But the question is, was there any use of penicillin by the RANC in this period? Because that had just become available.
Yes, it was used extensively, and in fact, a lot of Germans wanted to surrender to the British. So they got injured because they could get access to penicillin, which they couldn't get on their side.
Did the Americans get access to penicillin?
Probably for other reasons. Yeah, the Americans brought everything. I mean, I don't know if I told you this last time. The Americans gave the Russians 640,000 trucks. Just gave it to them. They were producing B-17 bombers at the rate of 1 every 7 minutes. The American industry just catapulted us, and penicillin was one of the benefits that came out of it. And they could produce it in bucket loads.
One question.
It's not really a question, it's just a comment. My son has recently become a Royal Artillery commander, and I probably shouldn't do, but I've also signed up to the Veterans Foundation and started watching the Instagram posts, which are truly extraordinary, and sort of, I think, demonstrate the qualities of the people that we talk about when we talk about this thing that they have.
Up here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have. And I would urge everybody here to join the Veterans Lottery postcode. What's it called? Veterans Lottery.
Yes.
Veterans Foundation Lottery, that's it. Yes.
Is there a question there?
Yeah, a comment and a question. I'm very jealous you got to ride in a car with
I'd never heard of him.
You've never heard of
No, I don't know.
Well, he did a fantastic programme on the Gunpowder Club.
Because one of his ancestors was Catesby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well connected.
Yeah.
His father was in the
Royal Artillery. His grandfather was in the Royal Artillery. He was a Catesby.
So I want to know when this programme sounds fascinating.
It's called My Grandparents' War. It was done 2.5 years. It's Channel 4, I think it is.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, but it's fun. I've never heard of this guy. And we went out to Italy and went into the hotel, and Celine on the desk looked up and said, "Hi, Frank." And she's having palpitations. Apparently, Game of Thrones is massive in Italy, so she was everybody's friend after that. Yeah.
I've got a personal question because my granddad took part in the battle, and I don't know only very little.
Polish.
Yes, Polish, and I've got a picture from my auntie, and maybe you could show the others that it's Padro there, and that's my granddad, but I don't know much about which regiment he's been, or I know he was Polish, so...
Are you guys familiar with what happened to the Poles?
No.
Can we divert for 5 minutes? It's a fascinating story. In
But you
1939,
can maybe...
I'll take it. In 1939, Poland was invaded from the east. I mentioned about the Crusades. It's such an important understanding. I never realised. In our village, there are 60 Polish cemeteries. Never understood what it's about. Anyway, in 1939, Poland was cut in two. The Germans invaded from one side and the Russians invaded from the other. Western Poland became part of the German Reich. And if you happened to be a Polish person, you suddenly became a German. On the eastern side, 1.6 million of them were removed to the gulags of Siberia and the Soviet Far East. Gone. That's fine until 1941, Operation Barbarossa, the Germans invade Russia. So suddenly the Poles in England are going, oh, excuse me, Mr. Russian, we're on your side. Can we have our 1.6 million people back, please? And of course, Stalin goes, oh, but tells his people, any Poles, stick them on the outside of the wire. So suddenly all these Poles are in the gulags on the outside of the wire with the warmth and the food on the inside. And the decision is made to form an army out of the Poles in a place called Bazaluk in Kazakhstan. And so the Poles start walking. Some of them walk 4,000 miles to get to Bazaluk. And the first makings of that army, commanded by Anders, is paraded in front of him in September 1941. 17,000 of them, in rag and bones, skeletons, emaciated, typhus, you name it, horrible. But they're starting to build an army. But Stalin won't give them the weapons because he doesn't want a whole lot of Poles, hairy Poles in his backyard. And so he leaves them there for the winter, and they start dying in -50, and it's horrible. And then the British step up because we want some manpower, and we agree to take over responsibility for the Poles. And we shipped them out in the summer of 42 to Tehran and then into Iraq, and then they're used there as they're building up their forces to block the Russians. They don't actually fight, but they're used in Mosul. And then they come in through Palestine, and that's when Alexander says, I'll take them. So they come into Italy in December 1943, and all they want to do is kill Germans on the way to getting to the Russians. And they arrive at Cassino knowing they're going to be used as the bloodiest task. But they're happy to do it. The first night of the Battle of Cassino, they lose 1,000 men. 1,000 men. They finally sort out Cassino, and we come to September 1944. The next big defence line is the Gothic line, massive, 26 miles deep. Who volunteers for the break-in battle, the hardest part? The Poles. And they get brutalised by that as well. Towards February 1945, the Curzon line comes up. Treaty of Yalta. Eastern Poland is going to be given to the Russians. Eastern Poles are the ones who are in Italy. Huh? So they're all perplexed. Hang on a second. You've done us in. And the army is on the edge of mutiny. And Alexander is worried sick because it's the biggest force he's got out there. Because as they drive north, they collect a German. Are you a Western Pole? I am. Join us. So their corps gets bigger as everyone else is falling over. So they are massive in the 8th Army by the time of the potential mutiny in February 45. And Anders is told, sort them out. He gathers his boys and he says, guys, we made a commitment. We're here to kill Germans. And we made a promise to the Brits we'll support them. Go away and get on with it. And they all support him. And they end up in Bologna in May 1945, costing the British government £3.5 million a month. And the British government want to offload these Poles. And the Poles are going, hang on a second. So they come up with a solution, because the Polish army in Italy doesn't exist. Because under the Treaty of Yalta, the Curzon line, the Polish government don't recognise the Polish government in London, and therefore they don't recognise the Second Polish Corps. So they're turned into the Polish Resettlement Corps, and they're airbrushed out. And it takes the Polish Immigration Act of 1946 to allow the Poles, if they want to come back to the UK, which is what they do. They come back to here, and then they go off to America, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, you name it. And that's why there are so many Poles in the UK, and that's why. And one of the reasons they came back was that the Americans were leaving, and so were the Canadians, so were the French. So all these air bases all over Yorkshire and Shropshire, they turned them into places because we want manpower. You can learn how to sew. Come to Low Moor in Sutton-on-the-Forest outside York. Want to be a coal miner? You go to Cannon Hall. So they sent these people all around the UK to learn a trade because we want these people to work for us. And of course the wall comes down in 1989 and they all come and see their cousins, which is why there's so many Poles in the UK. That was an abridged version of the Polish history. Incredible story.
Yeah, and about General Anders, the grand that took part in this, but we don't know which regiment and anything like that.
We must talk because I'll work it out.
Yes.
yes.
We better work it out.
Very interesting. Why
There's a-
don't
there's
we
a-
talk over?
There's a Polish records office in London. You can go and ask
Just
them.
talk over.
Poles, if you never take the mick out of the Poles, they're an incredible nation. The Poles were the first nation to elect their kings. They elected their kings in the 16th century. We all thought our kings came from God. They were electing them. Now, they elected a Frenchman at one point, which is a mistake. But what an incredible nation. Sorry.
Right, let's stop that. Can I invite Professor?
I've got to get the Poles.
I know Frank very well. Can I invite Professor Droyf just to give a vote of thanks? He's been writing copious notes again.
Sorry.
They will be legible, I'll make them legible, but I'll not look at them just now. What a tour de force again. It's a pleasure to thank you again, as I did last November, for a wonderful talk. And slightly shorter, but only slightly shorter because we couldn't stop, we wouldn't let you stop it in our...
Sorry.
So wonderful. Stuff that we feel now we ought to have known. That's the wonderful thing. You're telling us things that are so vividly described and we didn't really know. We knew a little bit about the fact that there was a bit of a to-do about the fall of Rome, but you really brought it to life in vividly so that we were hanging on the edge of our seats just to find out what happened and who was to blame. And I, like others in the audience, have this personal connection. We didn't know anything really about the military, the RAMC and how they actually operated. We knew they were there, but I certainly didn't know about that. And I probably should have, because the reason I'm here is that my dad got shot at night. I told you he'd been shot in the Apennines, very painful. But I realised when you started to speak, he was shot during the night by one of his short-sighted sentries. And had it been during the day, you would have had somebody else proposing the vote of thanks.
Yeah.
So really illuminating, and goodness me, the survival, you know, by a hair's breadth, by being carted back through the hills on the backs of mules or bodies. Very dramatic, unforgettable talk, and I'd ask you to thank.
Thank you.